There we go. Turn up our game. 3, 2, 1. Hello there and welcome back to Couldn't Scare Less. I'm your host, Trip. Today we're actually going to be talking about a show episode, specifically an episode of Black Mirror. We're getting a new season of that this month, and I wanted to talk about my favorite episode of Black Mirror, Playtest, which is a Black Mirror episode about horror video games reaching AI levels of being able to scare you specifically by knowing you specifically. It's a really interesting one. I enjoy this episode quite a lot, mostly because it is a beautifully done homage to horror games of old, as well as, while still doing what it's talking about. I also wanted to bring it up specifically not just because of Black Mirror's new season releasing, but also with the controversy around AI art these last few months. I feel like this episode can shed some light on that discussion with the idea of AI-generated horror, like using AI to try and create things to bring out human emotion. I think it's a very interesting part of the AI art discussion. But firstly, I should probably mention, the pod's back. It's been hard juggling YouTube, Twitch, and my life with how my medical stuff has been, but I'm trying to put some extra effort into the podcast as well as doing some cross-posting between here and our TikTok. So I'm on TikTok, it's in the description, and I decided I'd, have a TikTok talking about what I'm going to talk about in the podcast episodes to try and get some cross-synergy there. Why not, right? So, before we get into the episode too much, I'm going to go through the trigger warnings from Does the Dog Die, as I always do. Pretty tame ones this time. This is very PG-13. This is very chill. There are spiders. If you have issues with spiders, this is not the episode for you. Holy crap, is it not? Spiders are a big part of this. Would not recommend. Because of that, it's also marked as bugs. It marked as domestic violence. It is not technically domestic violence, but a couple do have a physical fight. It's complicated. There is definitely some gaslighting elements. It has a mark on Does the Dog Die for torture. Specifically, it's psychological torture. There is someone struggles to breathe. There's a seizure. There's head skin trauma. You don't see a parent die on screen, but there is discussion of death in the family, like death of a parent. It's actually quite a big part of one of the character stories. There are jump scares, very mild ones. A little bit of audio gore, not much. Tiny bit of shaky cam. And outside of a little bit of blood and gore, that is it, actually. From all the Does the Dog Die warnings. Oh, except for sad ending. Yeah, we get a sad ending on this one. Does the Dog Die has added some new slots with new triggers, which I love. But because this is from 2016, they haven't been filled in. But I do believe that is up to... I think that's all the triggers that I also identified. So, let's get... Well, again, it's been a while. Might have to pop myself in and out just to remember how to do things occasionally. Let me re-explain our format. With Black Mirror, with Couldn't Scare Less, I talk about why I highlight it. That was kind of our intro. I discuss the trigger warnings. I then go into a plot synopsis. And then I have discussion pieces at the end talking about the content we talked about. This... kind of repitching the podcast, Couldn't Scare Less is a podcast made for work, travel, or leisure for both horror fans and the horror intrigued. If you can't handle the scares that are actually in horror, but can handle hearing the plot and stuff talked about like this, then this is the perfect podcast for you. Our episode begins with our protagonist packing a big old traveler's backpack and psyching themselves up for a big trip overseas. Our protagonist here is actually Wyatt Russell, who you may know as John Walker, aka U.S. Agent from the MCU. I actually was first introduced to him from a very good horror movie called Overlord, which is about World War II and Nazi zombies. It's incredibly good, and I should cover it at some point on the pod. I will. Eventually, I'll get there. We don't learn the character's name for a while, so I'm going to be calling him Russell from here on out until we get his name. As Russell gets ready to leave the house, he walks past a photograph, showing us a family in better times. 2 parents and their son. What appears to be a waterfall? I'm visually impaired, I can't really tell what it is they're by. Before he gets into an Uber and gets a call from his mother, which he ignores the at-work auto-response to mute. On the airplane, we see our traveler, who is actually American, which is very atypical for Black Mirror, is watching a monster movie on the plane, featuring a huge spider climbing up a building. I actually don't know what movie this is from specifically, I couldn't find it. But if you know what it is, feel free to let me know. I feel like it's a reference of some sort. And then plays on their phone, a video game, before they're asked to shut off their devices due to turbulence. But there's a very cute moment after that where he comforts a little girl who's scared by the turbulence and compares it to a roller coaster. It's a really sweet opening, like many Black Mirror episodes have. We then get a montage of Russell traveling across Australia, Asia, and Europe, backpacking the world, doing all the things, through a montage of travelers' photos, before he ends in England. Context tells us that he's running away from family or something, but he finds himself near the end of his journey missing that human connection as we see him eyeing 2 people kissing in a cafe. Decides to grab load up a dating app and gets a match. Decides to meet said match at a pub in England. We learn that she's a website manager for a tech firm, and they talk a lot about his trip and how he's been running from his life in the States a little bit, but he's enjoying his time adventuring, seeing the world for the first time. But some things off screen happen, and they end up in bed together the next morning with less clothes, and he ignores another call from Mom as a rude awakening to his day. We've not gotten either of these characters' names yet, but we learned that when they go downstairs that she's an avid gamer and reader, as she has a big bookshelf full of video games and books about video games on a very IKEA basic kind of bookshelf. It's very bland, especially given the contents in it. They have some nice back and forth banter that's genuinely kind of cute. Call number 3 gets ignored, and we get some spilled tea as the actress, it's actually the character's name is Sonia. We've not gotten to that. But she is Hannah John Kamen, who you may know as Ghost from the MCU. So it's really funny seeing these 2 MCU characters interacting in a non-MCU thing. She kind of gently pries a little bit about why he ignores her calls, and we learn from... He's not said his name in character yet, but his name is Cooper Redfield. Yes, in a reference to Resident Evil, which I'm ironically playing on the Twitch channel. He reveals that his father recently died of Alzheimer's after we don't know how long taking care of him by himself, it seems like. He just can't stand to be in the family home without his dad in it anymore. And that pain he felt losing his best friend and favorite person. That he would go to help him some days and his dad just wouldn't remember his name. And because of that pain, that weight, he doesn't know how to talk to his mom or connect with her anymore, that his dad is gone. Connecting with a parent after the loss of another one is a very difficult time, especially if the parents aren't super close, which it seems like they were not, hither to his death. This is where we learn his name is Cooper. Movies and shows that wait ages to give us names bugs me. And if you've listened to the pod to this point, you know it's a running issue of mine on the pod, because when I'm writing these scripts, I rarely remember, or like the plot synopsis scripts, I rarely remember the characters' names from the start. So I typically don't actually have them in my script until we get there. Occasionally I make exceptions and I'll look up the names beforehand, but when I'm giving a plot synopsis, I find it makes sense to include the names when the names are included. Anyways, by the time we've learned that Cooper is Cooper Redfield, we already have a very well-rounded character, especially for a TV show, especially for an anthology TV show. Black Mirror excels at this, where a lot of other anthology shows and movies suffer, where they have fully fleshed out characters for us to follow and care about before the horror ever starts. I think that's something a lot of anthology stuff doesn't do, is they don't flesh out the characters enough for me to care about what happens to them. Maybe someday I'll do an episode talking all about anthologies and why I have a love-hate relationship with them. Anyways, the next morning at an ATM, later on in the morning, same morning, we've learned his bank account info was compromised at some point during his trip, and he's out of money, and is currently trapped in England until the bank sorts out his identity stealage. Identity theft, that's the one. I didn't have it written incorrectly. I had identity question mark. This moment of crisis is almost enough to make him call his mom. Instead, we cut to him on the stairs outside of the girl he's dating, not even dating, the girl he hooked up with apartment stairs. There's a very funny line here about trying to secure a date number 2, something like that. But I find it very funny, the concept of hooking up with someone on a dating app. You come home from work to find them on your stairs again because, they have to crash at your place because they're out of money, because their identity got stolen. I would in no world let him back in that house. However, she is a better person than I am and agrees to let him crash in her place. Well, he uses an app called Odd Jobs to find some money. And he finds an offer from a mega gaming corporation called Saitogamo, which is a huge horror game studio with a secretive genius creator named Sheo Sato. That's very clearly based on Hideo Kojima. It's not even subtle. Cooper heads out to their facility, which is a very fancy headquarters building that looks gorgeous, with the intention of getting both some of Saito's money and double dipping by trying to get pictures of the stuff they're secretly working on in there, because Saito and the company are very secretive. We meet a staff member named Katie, who walks him through Saitogamo. While being hurried along by Katie, Cooper, he makes some very very ham-fisted, nerdy references, including Resident Evil, I believe, and Indiana. There's a couple, I don't like references for the sake of references that don't feel genuine or, fitting. This is one of those rare times in this episode where his dialogue just feels weird. And it's not like he didn't even know who this company was, barely. He played, one of their games and was unfamiliar with the name of the studio, even. So it's weird behavior from Cooper. Anyways, Katie takes his phone so he can't leak information and turns it off before he has to sign this big, long NDA and agrees to receive a small medical procedure that they say is no more invasive than getting your ears pierced. I'm sure it isn't. Katie leaves to grab a missing page of paperwork, which gives Cooper the opportunity to spring into action, turn on his phone, and leak some pictures of the stuff, the paperwork, to Sonia. We don't get her name said for a while. We actually get it here from the text message bar at the top, which I had to pause in Zoom to read. Yeah, so, again, my gripe with character naming. We don't learn her name out loud for another 30 minutes. Maybe it's 20. She comes back, but Cooper forgets to turn off his phone. And as she starts to describe this new type of VR, how it's like adding layers on top of reality, using something they call a mushroom, which goes on the back of your neck. It's apparently a temporary, pop-in thing that lets that tech access your brain, and they tune it in. It commences as his phone rings. There's a call from Mom, and Katie kind of is turn that off. I thought for sure, and just she doesn't freak out as much as one would normally in an NDA situation where you leave the room for a second, you come back, and the person who had signed an NDA, their phone is suddenly back on. In the real world, he would have lost his job right there. But we're in Black Mirror, so it's okay. They take off the headgear very quickly, but leave the little mushroom on, and he's able to see a digital gopher, which rapidly upscales from like a 16-bit arcade looking. He almost looks like one of those mini blocks, not raccoons, gophers. But eventually, by turning up the settings, he goes all the way to a lifelike 3D image of Whack-A-Mole in his brain, which is very interesting. They describe that the tech allows the brain to create its own version of the images and the things programmed. So there are these little cards, kind of like the Nintendo's 3DS's 3D software, where they scan the card and it shows an image. In this, your brain looks at, scans the card and creates the image. The Gopher demo we get here is actually super cute. It reminds me of that Nintendo 3DS thing I talked about earlier. Cooper responds really well to it, and he has a blast. And he gets moved up to a bigger beta test branch with the promise of more money, and actually gets to meet Shio Saito. I'm bad at pronunciation. With Katie serving as a translator because Saito's English is very limited. Saito has a question here, and I like this question a lot. We'll actually talk about it a little later. Why do players glow after a jump scare? And Cooper immediately responds with, well, it's the adrenaline. And Xiao's like, not quite. Because, yeah, there's adrenaline, but horror games, and also horror media in general, allows you to release fear and liberate yourself of that fear in a safe environment. Which is actually something I talk to people about when I am asked why I liked horror. Even though I'm someone with very severe PTSD, I adore horror movies. It's that ability to fear in small amounts in a safe place that makes me feel more in control of myself and my life, as well as releasing some of that adrenaline. It feels really good and liberating, I guess, to have that, to get controlled releases of that fear and anxiety out. Xiao continues that they're working on a survival horror game that uses your own brain to scare you using an adaptive program. In this case, aka, we're talking about AI, which we'll be discussing at length at the end. They don't call it AI here, but it's AI. They eventually cop and say, yeah, it's an AI, artificial intelligence we don't have super control over. Because Black Mirror. With a short countdown, another calibration, they then physically drive him to a house from one of the company's other games that is called the Harlech Shadow House, which is ripped straight out of Resident Evil with a touch of Silent Hill. I love the aesthetics we get henceforth in the movie. This isn't technically a movie, it's a TV show episode. When Cooper arrives there, we get a set of rules. All he has to do is stay in the house as long as he can. He gets an earpiece and a reminder that nothing he can see can actually physically harm him. And they decide to establish a safe word in case things get too intense. He chooses the safe word of stop, aka one of the only words you shouldn't use as a safe word. Way to go. It doesn't end up mattering, but go to for safe word safety. Don't use a word you might say instinctively. Say a word that you have to make yourself think to say. Something like stop or oh no or please. Those are instinctive words that can come out in a time of emotion without processing it cognitively. This is one of those. Don't use stop. Use a word like pineapple or garden hose or something you have to think about to say. Not something that's an instinctive word. Anyways, rant aside. The set designing for this gamekeeper's house is absolutely magnificent and does look like it was pulled right out of a horror game right into the real world. Though in this case it's kind of ambiguous which came house. Which came first, the house or the game? But Cooper discovers that the kitchen is actually stocked with some non-alcoholic wine. That the whole house has tons and tons and tons of cameras, obviously, and a control room in it for Katie to monitor their test game. As he sits in a really nice regal red chair facing a fireplace with some of this non-alcoholic wine, he starts a fire, pulls up a book, a box used for a footrest, and settles in. As Cooper goes for his phone, we get some discussion about the house's time period being from the 19th century, and the very popular theory that it's believed people saw some more ghosts and cryptids and stuff like that in the past due to our understimulated brains. Now that we have more technology and more things, our brains are more often in a state of like well stimulated or overstimulated even. So we're not getting as many of those kind of widespread belief in ghosts and crap like that. That's not something I'm going to talk about too much today because we've got a lot of other topics to cover. But anyways, Cooper actually picks up a book. 19th century, what else is he going to do? And starts reading from the works of Poe, which ties in very nice to its theming here later. We get a heart rate spike as he looks over from the book, as he sees a big, admittedly poorly proportioned spider skitter across the floor, and then go into his blind side, out of sight, behind the table next to him. As he leans around the corner to look for it, we get our first jump scare via the spider quickly skittering up and startling him on the armchair's arm. And we learn that he, like most of the population, don't like spiders, and that the AI worked this out immediately as a good way to scare him. With some trial and error, he successfully crushes the spider to death, even though it's not real, though he does remark how good the spider was looking, but size, weak sauce, right as the lights flicker, and he notices, I love this effect, he notices the painting next to him is changed, so there's now a guy silhouette in the window watching him from within the painting. I'm a sucker for this effect in shows and stuff, especially when it looks good like this one does. And then with a sound effect, it's just gone. As a creaking floorboard sound comes from above him, along with some skittering footsteps. Some mysterious figures moving out of sight. As he rounds the corner, joking about it just being the pipes of the old house, boom! Jump scare Victorian figure in his face. We actually saw this Victorian figure being drawn in the background in an earlier scene. His reaction here is amazing by the actor, especially when he realizes the Victorian figure here actually has the face of a high school bully of our protagonist, Cooper. This high school bully being Josh Peters, who left some scarring on his shoulder, I believe, if I recall correctly. The man doesn't move, and Cooper moves on to drink more non-alcoholic wine and start talking about his trip to France, the wine stomping and things like that, which Katie quickly points out that his rambling is helping him mask and compensate for the fear. Very common thing to do. I do this in my Resident Evil series, if you've been watching that over my YouTube and Twitch channel. So Cooper grabs some ginger snaps from the little containers in the cabinet. They're not bottles, but they're jars, I suppose would be the best word for what these are. We get one of my favorite moments in the episode, as well as one of my favorite moments in Black Mirror across the board. With the cabinet door open, he points out the trope of video games using things that temporarily block off your vision to introduce scares by having something move into that space when you can't see it. And he jokes about it being an obviously telegraphed incoming scare. And he's right. Sort of. As he closes the door and sees a shadow that looks like the Victorian Josh Peters. Like, you got me. That's pretty good. But the shadow moves towards him around the corner. And really big jump scare here if you're watching, because it is a freaking huge spider with a human face that's kind of like split partially in half by spider mandibles. It is an amazing scare with excellent effects, especially for 2016 and the low budget. Medium budget, I'll say. It's not low, it's medium. And it's played with afterwards with more humor than horror, but it's a really scary looking spider. And they touch about how the AI is using his brain to make the scares. So this messed up head spider thing that looks straight out of The Binding of Isaac IRL is the work of Cooper's brain. And they have a good laugh about how effed up Cooper's brain is for creating this so early on in the experiment. We actually see the spider breathe and slither a few inches forward. Katie's voice cuts out from the earpiece as loud knocks bang on the door. The spider's no longer moving, as Cooper assumes it's them coming to fix the earpiece. He goes to the front door. The knocking is incessant. And he opens it up, and it's Sonia. Says, "You're in danger," as we enter our next act. Cooper freaks out because this Sonia is real, which he makes a very large, point of by repeatedly touching her face. She is real. Somehow. But Cooper is still convinced this is part of the game. Sonia explains that the company is operating illegally, as their patent, was rejected for being dangerously unsafe. She was able to get this based off the pictures that he leaked to her phone of the NDA paperwork. Cooper, like anyone in the situation would honestly, doesn't believe a frickin' thing she says, and thinks that they hired her to add more authenticity to this scary game demo thingy, which doesn't quite make a lot of sense when you think about it, but it's not impossible either. As they go into the kitchen, Sonia decides to give us some more enlightenment on the situation. She also found that there have been 5 missing tourists who apparently took suspicious jobs through this Odd Jobs app. I know, shocked Pikachu face. Shady Craigslist is being used illegally? Oh no! Cooper then asks her a really genuinely good and clever question. Again, I love clever horror antagonists. How did she find him? He's in a house made by a video game company in the middle of nowhere that is part of a secret game testing project. How could she possibly find him? She, without hesitation, says, well, she used Find My Friends and followed it to where he is. But she couldn't have, which Cooper points out, because his phone is over a mile away in a different building. And with all of that being true, how could she have possibly, one, gotten there, and then gotten here, if it's all such a big secret? Sonia doesn't really seem fazed by this, as she makes quite a large display of kind of shoulder-checking past Cooper to go over to the knife block and pull out a big old kitchen knife. And she explains, well, she cloned his credit card. She points at him to this job listing. And in a very creepy voice, she says, he should have called his mom when he had the chance. As Sonia scrapes the knife's tip along the wooden table, walking towards her. Cooper goes to leave, but he didn't notice the spider wasn't in the kitchen when he came back in last, only to be jump scared by the face spider as he tries to leave and turns around to be stabbed in the back by Sonia as he's trying to turn away from the spider back towards Sonia. And to his shock, he's been stabbed. He makes sure, yeah, holy crap, there's a knife in my back. And they start to wrestle before he throws her head against the shelf as he reels with the pain of the actual stab wound, before being pushed to the ground and shoved in a way that forces the blade of the knife up through his shoulder by hitting the knife handle against the ground in what would be a brutally painful moment He frantically tries to grab the neck of the broken wine bottle as he cries out in pain, begging for help, begging, stop, please. Sonia stops trying to choke him long enough for him to try and pull her ponytail to try to, get him off her. Well, other way around, get her off him a little bit. Which makes her face morph into a flesh-covered skull, but the flesh is kind of just out of line, and it screams and roars before he impales its head with the knife blade that is sticking out of his chest. As he gasps and whimpers, the camera pans back, and it wasn't real. The audio from the earbud is returned, and he yells at Katie about how he could feel Sonia in the room. He could feel the pain. He could feel the knife. In a very logically angry list of yelling into the earpiece, she's just kind of like, nah, that can't happen, silly. Completely dismisses his reaction. Cooper begins to explain that the series of stimuli he experienced, being very specific, trying to get through to her science-y brain to see what's wrong here. And Katie relents that the interface might be doing something it shouldn't. And in that case, they should pull the plug. But he can't physically pull the plug out of his head because it might just kill him. And they need him to go upstairs to an access point, and they'll safely remove it from him and him from there. Kind of like a video game extraction point, fittingly. He makes his way up the stairs. As he reaches that final door, anxiety looms, both in the episode and in real life as you're watching, as he gets to this door. But he's scared to open it. He starts to spiral in worries of what will be behind this door to try and scare him one last time. He's convinced it'll be his mother. Something messed up to hurt him one last time. Katie promises he'll be fine, and he just needs to open the door. And he opens the door into a bedroom with a huge fancy bed on it. Only for the voice this whole time to have been a lie. It's an audio-visual AI after all. Katie's voice says, "We wanted to see if we've broken you enough to obey instruction without questioning." And we have. She starts to ask him his questions about his mother. If that was the truest horror he was thinking about, can you describe your mother? Can you describe her face? Her hair color? Is she tall, short, fat, thin? As Cooper's real fear begins to manifest, the real thing he's the most afraid of. A long line of questions follow that he can't answer. Behind this door, he did find what scared him most. Forgetting. Forgetting himself and the people he loved like he watched his father do before his death. The voice tells him to look in the mirror and asks him, "Do you recognize yourself? Soon you won't be anything. You'll be just like your dad." As the voice echoes, telling him how bad of a son he's been to his mother, he punches the mirror and tries to remove the mushroom brain plug as Katie and staff rush in to help him from a side door. Katie laments that she can't stop it. Explains that basically the quote, data tendrils, her words not mine, seep too deep into his brain and she can't stop it. Xiao leans down and says, "On behalf of Xiao Saito Game Team, I humbly apologize." Put him with the others. As he's pulled out of the room, we cut back to him getting out, having the plug removed in the room where he first met Xiao. Katie explains that it's still way too powerful. And again, they apologize for his time. He's on a flight home. Gets dropped off outside his family home with that same big burly backpack. He opens the door, drops off his luggage, and calls for his mom to find her crying on her bed. She says, "I have to call him. I have to." And picks up her phone and says, "Why did Cooper go?" As she dials to call Cooper again. Cooper begs, Mom, it's me. I'm home." His mom doesn't remember his face and says it's time for her to call her son again. And we cut back to the phone call from Mom in the original room with the first tech demo again, with Cooper yelling, "Mom, Mom, Mom," as the phone rings and he starts to seize in the chair before he stops. He never left that first demo room with the Gophers. We learned from a conversation in Japanese between Shayo, Saito, and Katie that the phone's interference caused the upload signal to light up every synapse in his brain at once and then stop, killing him. As they zip up the body bag, Katie fills out an incident report for Cooper's death, and the credits roll. There's a lot of stuff to talk about here. We've got unreliable narrator, horror from your brain to you, AI generated art. There's a whole bunch of stuff to talk about here. I didn't think about the whole unreliable narrator angle until I was looking at the IMDB page, which makes a point of the references to Poe in here, and how Poe was famous for having unreliable narrators in his horror. If I had prepped to talk about that, I would have, but I didn't. I want to leave us here with our discussion questions, and we got 2 big ones today. Well, I guess 3 big ones. Can AI generate horror better than humans can make it? Does escapism, like horror, travel, gaming, actually help us as people? And how much detachment and escapism is too much escapism, too much detachment? Specifically because with the voice in the game talking about how bringing him down to the route of nothingness, someone devoid of humanity by having no memory and self. Can we be too detached from our problems? I was going to do these in the other order, but I actually want to start with this one. Can you be too detached from your problems? And is there such thing as too much escapism? I think so, but I do think it's rarer than most people would think it is. I only think too much detachment or escapism from your problems comes from one of 2 things happening. 1, you begin to deny that the bad things that happen to you, where you've distanced yourself from your past so much that you start to not trust your own memories. Sometimes it's fine to understand that we can be unreliable narrators in our own life, kind of like how Cooper was an unreliable narrator for most of this story, but self-validation is important, especially when it comes to things that would need us to detach and escape. Things like trauma, things like illness. And when we start to invalidate those wrongs that we have experienced and that hurt that we feel, I think that's where we can become too detached and escape too much. Where we try to run so far from our pain that we try to pretend we've never felt pain and we're not going to feel pain again. And you kind of live in this void of forcing yourself to not think about what you're feeling, to try and be happy. But you can't be happy when you have no feelings. Just like you can't be happy if there's nothing to ever compare it to. And trying to always be detached from everything remotely bad or remotely problematic or anything that could affect our mood at all means we'll never take risks. Means we'll never really live a life of any meaning. And it can kind of lead to us being devoid of self. If we're defined by the fact we're running from our problems, then what defines us if we're running from what our own identity was forged by? The connected question to that was, does escapism actually help? And I do think it does, in correct amounts. Escapism alone won't help you deal with your problems. This is more specifically aimed at like the mental health idea of escapism as a coping mechanism. I have mental health problems as well as, experience in the mental health field from study in college, as well as, when you have medical problems and you work with medical staff on it, they teach you a lot of stuff about it. It's kind of required. And I think escapism in the mental health field aspect, I think it can be helpful if done properly. I'm going to give you 3 tips for escapism with mental health. Number 1, choose carefully what you escape to. Try not to make it a vice. Alcohol, drugs, pornography, things like that, gambling, things that you know can be addictive to a vulnerable mind. Try not to escape to those if you can. If you have options, which most people do, because replacing problems with a vice will just create more problems. I'm not particularly against any of those things I said. I think they're fine when done in healthy manners, but use caution, use wisdom with what you choose. Secondly, have your escapism and your leisure be separate things in separate times. Leisure is important to, make sure you're enjoying your life, but don't have all escapism be leisure and don't have all leisure be escapism. You need a balance, because if you only let yourself feel happiness every time you're running from a problem, using escapism, it's not running from a problem, okay. If you only let yourself feel happiness in leisure time, when things are going wrong, how will you ever enjoy your life when things go right? And how will you be able to tell when things are going right if you're not letting yourself be happy? Conversely, it's important that your escapism and your leisure are separate in a second aspect, and that what you escape to isn't the exact same as just having leisure time. Because that kind of then doesn't let escapism do its purpose. Escapism is intentionally chosen distance between you and a problem, so you can return to that problem when you're ready. And I don't think a lot of people recognize that distinct difference, and I think that's really important. Third thing for escapism that'll help you be able to use escapism more healthily in your own life: have grace with yourself. The human brain is a piece of meat that has electricity flowing through it all the time. It's gonna be illogical. It's gonna frick up. And that's okay. And that's not your fault. And just like with all things in the mental health field, if you don't give yourself enough grace and enough time to let your brain work through what it needs to work through, then that extra pressure you're putting on yourself can make yourself worse, not better. Then we've got the big one, the big kahuna to talk about. Can AI generate horror better than humans can? I had a whole TikTok talking about this that I'm posting the same day as this video, and I think no. I don't think AI will be able to generate horror better than humans can. However, I'll explain my reasoning, then I'll play devil's advocate. My reasoning: humans understand what makes us scared, what makes us feel anxious, on edge. So we can put that into words and send that off. Pass that horror down to the next person to make them jump out of their skin. However, AI doesn't have personal experiences to draw from. It can only draw from other people's experiences that you put into it, and that it attempts to replicate. So at best, AI will just be trying to replicate what humans have already done. It's not so much making something new as it is trying to trace multiple pictures you put over top of each other to try and make a new picture. Is your picture new that you've traced around bits of all these different pictures? Technically, depending on your belief, the ship of Theseus theory, maybe. But have you created something new? Something that's unique? No. Is it a new piece of art? Yes. Is it unique? No. But to play devil's advocate, suppose we find that AI can write horror in a way we can't. We kind of get we might have a new Lovecraftian horror kind of angle where AI, in its attempts to replicate how humans feel fear, is able to write and put into words fear we can't fathom well enough to write. For example, there are there are a couple movies that touch on the horrors of infinity. I don't think there are enough of these. But how terrifying infinity truly is. Best one I can give you is like Happy Death Day. That's in the horror genre directly. I think Groundhog Day does it really well, but that's not a horror movie technically. But imagine an AI-generated horror movie, or horror script, or whatever, horror story, that can nail that concept better than a human can. Because the human mind cannot calculate for infinity, can't really understand in its trueness. A computer can, and frequently does, deal with small infinities. Don't get me started on how there are different sizes of infinity. I will throw my microphone across the room. I really enjoy science and physics and metaphysics. However, not the discussion for today. I will go on a rambling for far too long about it. But an AI being able to understand infinity better than us, that's something that could make an AI write, theoretically, something scarier than we can. Another example, I think, would be the loss of human self. Humans are always human. We can't not be what we are as hard as we try. AI isn't. So, you could have an AI-generated story that uses aspects from different people trying to explain the dehumanization process that sometimes happens in horror. I'm thinking The Fly is the best example of that. That kind of loss of humanity over time. You get it in little bits in like serial killer horror, but losing your identity, becoming less human, becoming less you, and then being confronted with that's something AI can maybe do better than a person. Kind of like this one, with the idea of, how terrifying it is to lose one's memory of self. That's scary as hell. Maybe AI can write that better than we can, because AI can look at it in a different dimension than we can, a different angle, when AI gets to that point. Right now, most AI is replication, not creation. Again, if we get to AI gets creation, I think that's possible. While we have AI just basically recreating art in different ways, I think we're just going to kind of see that thing I talked about earlier, multiple pictures overlapped over each other, then traced around to make something that's technically new, but is not actually unique. But I think AI horror might become a novelty, might laugh at it, might be generally a little unnerving, given that it was written by not a person. But I don't think it's going to be groundbreaking or revolutionary, just in the way that 4D horror wasn't groundbreaking and revolutionary when it made its debut in, the 70s? Yeah. I'm not going to count my chickens on the AI horror trend. But I hope you enjoyed me talking about this episode. You should also go listen to my TikTok talking about the idea of AI horror. I think I wrapped it up there pretty well. And thanks for listening other than that. Peace out, guys.